Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Tonight we are going to read through chapter 27 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. If this is your first time watching, this is not a typical reading. We're not just reading the words on the pages, but we're talking about interesting vocabulary words, explaining and defining interesting vocabulary words as we read, or explaining phrases that maybe are difficult to understand if your first language isn't English. So if you are watching this live with me right now, then I definitely encourage you to ask questions as we go. That's what makes don't think you're bothering me, don't think you're interrupting me. That's what makes the video interesting. If you don't ask questions, then I will just explain words I think you probably don't know, or explain phrases that I think are probably not clear for you. So definitely make questions if any arise for you. All right, so we are going to read chapter 27, which is entitled Tommy Traddles. So Tommy Traddles, we'll just do a little review. This is a very long book. I think we're on page 600. We're getting close to halfway through the book. But Tommy Traddles was a boy that Davy went to school with when he first went to school. He went to a very horrible school. All the boys who went to that school were very traumatized. And then Davy went off and did many other things. And a few weeks ago, he was at a party, a dinner party, and he ran into Tommy Traddles there. So this is like an old school friend from a very long time ago. All right, so let's read about Tommy Traddles, see what he's up to. It may have been in consequence of Mrs. Crupp's advice. Mrs. Crupp, Davy has fallen in love with his boss's daughter. There's absolutely no way that any kind of relationship can ever form between them. But Mrs. Crupp, his landlady, noticed that he was acting funny and said, "Oh, you're interested in a girl." And she gave the advice that maybe he should go out and play a game. Something to distract him so he doesn't obsess over this girl. So that's what he's referring to when he says, it may have been in consequence of Mrs. Crupp's advice, and perhaps for no better reason than because there was a certain similarity in the sound of the word Skittles and Traddles. Mrs. Crupp suggested that he play a game called Skittles. I don't know what that game is, but it's a game. And Davy was thinking Skittles, Traddles. So I guess instead of playing Skittles, he's going to contact his friend Traddles to distract him from this new problem of his. It may have been because of the similarity between the words Skittles and Traddles that it came into my head next day to go and look after Traddles. The time he had mentioned was more than out, and he lived a little street near Veterinary College at Camden Town, which was principally tenanted, as one of our clerks who lived in that direction informed me, by gentlemen students who bought live donkeys and made experiments on those quadrupeds. Quadra means four, ped means feet, so a quadruped is any animal with 4 legs. In their private apartments. You know, Traddles is a very strange character, and the thing that you remember about Traddles during the school days when he was a little boy being abused at that school, he used to draw skeletons all the time. That was how he dealt with being abused. So if you saw him writing, he would be drawing skeletons in his book, really kind of cool-looking skeletons. And now it seems that he lives in a neighborhood filled with veterinary students. A veterinarian A veteran is someone who's experienced in war. A veterinarian is an animal doctor. So this neighborhood is filled with students and teachers of a veterinary school. So a school where doctors are being trained to work on animals. And there are rumors that people buy animals alive and they do weird experiments with them. So that's kind of interesting about Traddles, his obsession with skeletons, and now he lives in this weird neighborhood where they experiment, supposedly they experiment on animals. Having obtained from this clerk a direction to the academic grove in question, I set out the same afternoon to visit my old schoolfellow. I found that the street was not as desirable as I could have wished it to be for the sake of Traddles. So when Davy arrived at this place, he thought, "Oh, this is not a nice neighborhood," and he had hoped that Traddles was living in better conditions than that. The inhabitants appeared to have a propensity to throw any little trifles they were not in want of into the road, which not only made it rank and sloppy, but untidy too, on account of cabbage leaves. So in this neighborhood, people would throw their garbage out the window, so the streets were smelly and dirty. Irma says propensity. I don't know if you know the word tendency. Like a habit. Let's say it's like a habit. So let's reread that again where it says propensity. The inhabitants appear to have the habit to throw any little trifles that they were not in want of into the road. So the people who live in that neighborhood have the habit, the propensity, the tendency, if they have garbage, to just throw it out the windows into the street. Which not only made it rank and sloppy, but untidy too, on account of the cabbage leaves. The refuse was not wholly vegetable either, for I myself saw a shoe, a doubled-up saucepan, a black bonnet, an umbrella, in various stages of decomposition, and as I was looking out for the number that I wanted, the general air of the place reminded me forcibly of the days when I lived with Mr. and Mrs. Micawber. An indescribable character of faded gentility that attached to the house I sought, and made it unlike all the other houses in the street. Though they were all built on one monotonous pattern, it looked like the early copies of a blundering boy who was learning to make houses, and had not yet got out his cramped brick and mortar pothooks. Reminded me still more of Mr. and Mrs. Micawber. So walking down this street reminded him of Mr. and Mrs. Micawber were a couple that Davy lived with when he was forced to work in this horrible place in London. He rented a room from them. And they always need money. They're always desperate for money. So the place that they lived was very miserable. And Davy is reminded of this place now, as he's going to find his friend Traddles. Happening to arrive at the door, as it opened to the afternoon milkman, I was reminded of Mr. and Mrs. Micawber more forcibly yet. "Now," said the milkman to a very youthful servant girl, "has that there little bill of mine been heerd on?" "Oh, master says he'll attend to it immediate," was the reply. "Because," said the milkman, going on as if he had received no answer, and speaking, as I judged from his tone, rather for the edification of somebody within the house than of the youthful servant, an impression which was strengthened by his manner of glaring down the passage. So he ignored the servant who said, yes, he's going to pay the bill, and he's looking past her down the hall. Because there's this little bill has been running so long that I begin to believe it's run away altogether and never won't be heard of. Now I'm not going to stand it, you know, said the milkman, throwing his voice into the house and glaring down the passage. So he's not really talking to the servant. He's talking past her into the house. I'm not going to stand it, you know. Give me my money. As to his dealing in the mild article of milk, by the by, there never was a greater anomaly. His deportment would have been fierce in a butcher or a brandy merchant. The voice of the youthful servant became faint. But she seemed to me, from the action of her lips, again to murmur that it would be attended to immediately. I tell you what, said the milkman, looking hard at her for the first time, and taking her by the chin. You fond of milk? You fond of milk? Yes, I likes it, she replied. Good, said the milkman. Then you won't have none tomorrow. D'ye hear? Not a fragment of milk you won't have tomorrow. I thought she seemed, upon the whole, relieved by the prospect of having any today. Wait a minute, let me read that again. I thought she seemed, upon the whole, relieved by the prospect of having any today. The milkman, after shaking his head at her darkly, released her chin, and with anything rather than goodwill opened his can and deposited the usual quantity in the family jug. This done, he went away, muttering. Muttering is when you say bad things, but not really out loud. Never pay the bills. I hate those people that never pay me. I need my money. That's muttering. It's like complaining to yourself as you walk away from something. And uttered the cry of his trade next door in a vindictive shriek. Does Mr. Traddles live here? I then inquired. A mysterious voice from the end of the passage replied, yes. Upon which the youthful servant replied, yes. Is he at home? Said I. Again, the mysterious voice replied in the affirmative, and again the servant echoed it. Upon this I walked in, and in pursuance of the servant's directions, walked up the stairs, conscious as I passed back the parlor door that I was surveyed by a mysterious eye, probably belonging to the mysterious voice. When I got to the top of the stairs, the house was only a story high above the ground floor. Traddles was on the landing to meet me. He was delighted to see me, and gave me a welcome with great heartiness to his little room. It was in the front of the house, and extremely neat, though sparely furnished. So it was a very clean room, a very nice, organized room, but there wasn't really any furniture in it. No decorations, no furniture. It was his only room, I saw, for there was a sofa bedstead in it, and his blacking brushes and blacking were among his books. And on the top shelf behind a dictionary, his table was covered with papers, and he was hard at work in an old coat. I looked at nothing that I know of, but I saw everything, even to the prospect of a church upon his china inkstand, as I sat down, and this, too, was a faculty confirmed in me in the old Mr. Micawber times, various ingenious arrangements he had made for the disguise of his chest of drawers and the accommodation of his boots, his shaving glass, and so forth, particularly impressed themselves upon me as evidences of the same Traddles who used to make models of elephants' dens and writing paper to put flies in, and to comfort himself under ill usage with the memorable works of art I have so often mentioned. So he's saying he's reminded of him drawing the skeletons. Sitting in Traddles' room again brings him back to school when they used to sleep in the same room together. So it was kind of like bringing him back to that point again. Traddles, said I, shaking hands with him again after I had sat down, I'm delighted to see you. I'm delighted to see you, Copperfield, he returned. I'm very glad indeed to see you. It was because I was thoroughly glad to see you when we met at Ely Place, and was sure you were thoroughly glad to see me, and I gave you this address instead of my address at Chambers. Oh, you have Chambers? Said I. Why, I have the fourth of a room and a passage, and the fourth of a clerk, returned Traddles. 3 others and myself unite to have a set of chambers, to look business-like. And we quarter the clerk, too. Have a crown a week, he costs me. So I think, chamber just means room. But I think here what chambers means is like an office. So Traddles has an office that he shares with 3 other people. And they even have an employee who stays there, who lives there. That's what it means that he's quartered there. That means he lives there. We quarter the clerk. That means we give the clerk a place to live. Half a crown a week he costs me. His old simple character and good temper, and something of his old unlucky fortune also, I thought, smiled at me in the smile in which he made this explanation. It's not because I have the least pride, Copperfield, you understand, said Traddles, that I don't usually give my address here. It's only on account of those who come to me. Who might not like to come here. For myself, I'm fighting my way in the world against difficulties, and it would be ridiculous if I made a pretense of doing anything else. You're reading for the bar, Mr. Waterbrook informed me, said I. Why, yes, said Traddles, rubbing his hands slowly over one another. I am reading for the bar. The fact is, I've just begun to keep my terms after a rather long delay. To read for the bar means preparing to become a lawyer. So he says you're preparing to become a lawyer, and he says yes, I am preparing to become a lawyer. The fact is, I've just begun to keep my terms after a rather long delay. It's some time since I was articled, but the payment of that £100 was a great pull, said Traddles, with a wince. Wincing is like when you feel pain. It's the facial expression you make when you feel some kind of pain. Oh. A great, what did he call it? A great what? A great pull. As if he had a tooth out. So they're saying he made a face like someone had pulled his tooth out. Do you know what I can't help thinking of, Traddles, as I sit here looking at you? I asked him. No, said Traddles. That sky blue suit you used to wear. Lord, to be sure, cried Traddles, laughing. Tighten the arms and legs, you know. Dear me, well, those were happy times, weren't they? I think our schoolmaster might have made them happier without doing any harm to any of us, I acknowledge, I returned. So Davy is remembering the blue suit Traddles used to wear during the school days, and that reminds Traddles of the time that they were at school, and he says, "Oh, those were great times." And Davy's like, "Not really. They used to beat us." "Perhaps he might," said Traddles, "but dear me, there was a good deal of fun going on. Do you remember the nights in the bedroom when we used to have the suppers and when you used to tell the stories? Ha ha ha. And do you remember when I got caned for crying about Mr. Mell? Old Creakle. I should like to see him again, too. He was a brute to you." Cane, that's what an old person walks with, a cane. To get caned means to get hit with a cane. So Traddle's like, "Remember the time when I got caned for crying about old Mr. Mell?" I don't remember. That was probably a story earlier in the book, but that was a long time ago. I don't remember what happened to old Mr. Mell. "He was a brute to you, Traddles," said I indignantly, for his good humor made me feel as if I had seen him beaten but yesterday. "Do you think so?" returned Traddles. "Really? Perhaps he was, rather. But it's all over. A long while. Old Creakle." "You were brought up by an uncle, then," said I. "Of course I was," said Traddles. "The one I was always going to write to, and always didn't. Ha ha ha. Yes, I had an uncle then. He died soon after I left school." "Indeed?" "Yes. He was a retired, what do you call it, draper, cloth merchant, and made me his heir, but he didn't like me when I grew up." "Do you really mean that?" said I. He was so composed that I fancied he must have had some other meaning. "Oh dear, yes. They're just talking about what's happened since the school days, and Traddles is saying my uncle raised me, and he made me his heir, which means when he died, he left me all of his possessions. And he says, but he never really liked me." And Davy said, "Really?" Davy was very surprised by Traddles' composure. Composure is how you appear to other people, the emotions that you decide to show. So if you are a composed person, you don't show any emotions. And so Davy couldn't understand. Traddles just said, he didn't like me. But it seemed like he didn't care. So Davy thought maybe he meant something different. That's why he said he was so composed that I thought he must have some other meaning. "Oh dear, yes, Copperfield, I mean it," replied Traddles. "It was an unfortunate thing, but he didn't like me at all. He said I wasn't at all what he expected, and so he married his housekeeper." "And what did you do?" "Wait a minute, I thought it said he made him his heir." Yes, he was a retired, draper merchant, and he had made me his heir, but he didn't like me when I grew up. Oh, so when he was a little boy, the uncle made him an heir, but when he got older, the uncle decided he didn't like him, and then he married one of the servants, so he probably left all of the money to his wife. Let's see. "And what did you do?" I asked. "I didn't do anything in particular," said Traddles. "I lived with them, waiting to be put out in the world until his gout unfortunately flew to his stomach." A gout is a kind of sickness, a kind of disease. And so he died, and so she married a young man, and so I wasn't provided for. Yeah, so the uncle married the servant, left all of the money to her, and when he died, she married someone else, and they just pushed him out into the street. Did you get nothing, Traddles, after all? Oh dear, yes, said Traddles. I got 50 pounds. I had never been brought up to any profession, and at first I was at a loss for what to do for myself. However, I began with the assistance of the son of a professional man who had been to Salem House, Yawler, with his nose on one side. So I guess his nose was crooked. Do you recollect him? No. He had not been there with me. All the noses were straight in my day. Oh, it don't matter, said Traddles. I began by means of his assistance to copy law writings. That didn't answer very well, and then I began to state cases for them and make abstracts and that sort of thing. For I am a plodding kind of fellow, Copperfield, and had learnt the way of doing such things pithily well. So he says, I'm a plodding kind of person. Plodding to me is a type of very uncoordinated walking. Let's see what Google has to say about that word, plodding. Not plotting like planning, but plodding with a D. Slow moving, unexciting. So I think here it almost means like disorganized. I'm a plodding kind of fellow. He wasn't just studying directly. He learned a little bit here and a little bit there. He didn't have any money. He couldn't pay for anything. So he just, I think you would say in modern English, he picked things up. Like he went along doing things, and as he did them, he learned a little here and a little there. He picked up the law little by little. And then pithy. Let's look at pithy. Pithy. Concise, forcefully expressive. Well, let's go back and reread this. For I am a plodding kind of fellow, Copperfield, and had learnt the way of doing such things pithily. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Wait, let me see if we change it to an adverb, if it changes anything. Pithily. Clever. Clever way that uses few words. He could write pithily. It's not a common word. You don't have to worry about it. Plodding just means slow, uncoordinated. So he says, I'm a plodding sort of fellow. I didn't organize my education. I learned a little bit here and I learned a little bit there. But how did he say pithily? Where did he say that? For I'm a plodding kind of fellow, Copperfield. So I'm slow. I'm not organized. I don't follow a curriculum, I guess is maybe what that means in this context. And I learned the way of doing such things pithily. Well, that put it in my head to enter myself as a law student, and that ran away with all that was left to the 50 pounds. Yawler recommended me to one or two of the other offices, however. Mr. Waterbrooks, for one. And I got a good many jobs. I was fortunate enough, too, to become acquainted with a person in a publishing way who was getting up an encyclopedia. And he set me to work. And indeed, looking at his table, I am at work for him at this minute. I'm not a bad compiler, Copperfield, said Traddles, preserving the same air of cheerful confidence in all he said, but I have no invention at all. Not a particle. So he's saying, I'm not very creative. I'm not a creative person. I suppose there never was a young man with less originality than I have. But that's not true, because he used to, when he was a boy, he used to always be drawing pictures. Seems like he is a creative person. As Traddles seemed to expect that I should assent to this as a matter of course, I nodded. So Traddles expected Copperfield to agree with him, and Copperfield nodded. And he went on with the same sprightly patience. I can find no better expression as before. So, little by little, and not living high, I managed to scrape up the £100 at last, said Traddles, and thank heaven that's paid. Though it certainly was, said Traddles, wincing. Oh, painful. Though it certainly was, said Traddles, wincing again, as if it had had another tooth out, a pull. I am living by the sort of work I have mentioned, still, and I hope one of these days to get connected with some newspaper which would almost be the making of my fortune. Now, Copperfield, you're so exactly what you used to be, with that agreeable face, and it's so pleasant to see you, and I shan't conceal anything. Therefore, you must know that I'm engaged. Irma, wincing is the face you make when you feel pain. Can you see me wincing? Oh. So each time Traddles talks about how difficult it was to get the money so that he could become a lawyer, and he thinks about how difficult it was to earn that £100, he winces. He makes a face of pain, like he's feeling pain. And Davy says it looks like someone is pulling his tooth from his face. That's how horrible it looks. Therefore, you must know that I am engaged. Engaged. Oh, Dora. Why did he say Dora? That's weird. Okay, well, maybe we'll find out in a minute. I'm not sure why that happens. She is a curate's daughter, said Traddles, one of 10, down in Devonshire. Yes, for he saw me glance involuntarily at the prospect on the inkstand. That's the church. You come round here to the left out this gate, tracing his finger along the inkstand, and exactly where I hold this pen, there stands the house, facing, you understand, towards the church. The delight with which he entered into these particulars did not fully present itself to me until afterwards, for my selfish thoughts were making a ground plan for Mr. Spenlow's house and garden at the same moment. So Davy's really trying to find a way to propose to Dora. That would be a big mistake. She's such a dear girl, said Traddles. A little older than me, but the dearest girl. I told you I was going out of town. I've been down there. I walked there, and I walked back. And I had the most delightful time. I dare say ours is likely to be a rather long engagement, but our motto is wait and hope. We always say that. Wait and hope. We always say. And she would wait, and Copperfield, till she was 60, any age she can mention, for me. Traddle rose from his chair with a triumphant smile, put his hand upon the white cloth I had observed. However, he said, it's not that we haven't made a beginning towards housekeeping. No, we have begun, but we must get on by degrees. We must have begun. Oh, wait, let me read that again. It's not that we haven't made a beginning towards housekeeping. No, we have begun. We must get on by degrees. That means we must go slowly. We must go step by step. But we have begun. Here, drawing the cloth off with great pride and care, are 2 pieces of furniture to commence with. So before they're allowed to be married, Traddles has to earn enough money to have a house and enough money to have servants and things like that. It's going to take a long time, but he's started building this, and now he's very proud that he has already purchased 2 pieces of furniture for their future house. And he's showing it to Davy. It's covered with a white cloth. And he pulls the cloth off. And he says, "Look, I already have 2 pieces of furniture." "This flower pot and stand she bought herself." You put that in the parlor window," said Traddles, falling a little back from it to survey it with a greater admiration. So he's looking at this flower pot and the stand and imagining it in his future house with his future life. He's very happy. "This little round table with the marble top. It's 2 feet 10 in circumference. I bought. You want to lay a book down, or somebody comes to see you or your wife and wants to play a place to stand a cup of tea upon. And there you are, again," said Traddles. "It's an admirable piece of workmanship, firm as a rock." I praised them both highly, and Traddles replaced the covering as carefully as he removed it. "It's not a great deal towards the furnishing," said Traddles, "but it's something. The tablecloths, the pillowcases." Do you know what a pillowcase is? Let's take a look at a pillowcase. I mean, it's a pretty basic thing that everybody has, but it's probably one of those words that you may not be familiar with. Let me see if I can find a picture. It's the covering for the pillow. But here's a picture. So you see this person's hand is on top of the pillow, and over the hand is the pillowcase. So it's the covering for the pillow. It's not a great deal towards the furnishing," said Traddles, "but it's something. The tablecloths, the pillowcases, the articles of that kind are what discourage me most." Copperfield. "So does the ironmongery." Okay, well, monger, that's not a very nice word. But the traditional word for a person who sells fish is a fishmonger. I mean, the way that you use monger now, it means like somebody who's greedy. So, but I guess it used to mean like the person who sells something. So, and you maybe would even still call a person who sells fish a fishmonger. So I just guess that an ironmonger is a person who sells iron things made of iron. Candle boxes and gridirons and that sort of necessaries, because those things tell and mount up, however, wait and hope. And I assure you she's the dearest girl. "I'm quite certain of it," said I. "In the meantime," said Traddles, coming back to his chair, "and this is the end of my prosing about myself. I get on as well as I can. I don't make much, but I don't spend much. In general, I board with the people downstairs." To board means to eat, to have food. So especially in old times, I don't know about now if it's still so common, but you might see a sign like room and board, which means you can rent a room here, but also with the money that you pay, we feed you. That's room and board. So when he says, "I board with the people downstairs," he must live in a building where many people rent rooms, and in the mornings and afternoons and evenings, they make dinner or breakfast, and everyone eats together like a family. "I board with the people downstairs, who are very agreeable indeed, both Mr. and Mrs. Micawber have seen a good deal of life and are excellent company. Hadi says good morning. Good morning, Hadi. It's evening here at 7:30 at night. And what is it? What time is it there? 7:30 in the morning? So this is hilarious because Traddles is saying, I'm bored with the people downstairs. Mr. and Mrs. Micawber are wonderful company. I really like them. Mr. and Mrs. Micawber are, when Davy was a little boy working in that horrible factory, these were the people that he rented a room from, and they became really good friends until Davy ran away to his aunt's house in Dover. But they met up again. They met several times since then, and now this is like an incredible miracle that Mr. and Mrs. Micawber are living in that same building with Traddles. Hadi says, Fessermonger? What's a fesser? Did you mean fish, or is fesser something else? I'm not sure what that word fesser is. F-E-S-R. My dear Traddles, I quickly exclaimed, what are you talking about? Traddles looked at me as if he wondered what I was talking about. Mr. and Mrs. Micawber, I repeated. Why, I'm intimately acquainted with them. An opportune means lucky. An opportune double knock at the door, which I knew well from old experience in Windsor Terrace, and which nobody but Mr. Micawber could ever have knocked at the door, resolved any doubt in my mind as their to being my old friends. I begged Traddles to ask his landlord to walk up. Traddles accordingly did so over the banister, and Mr. Micawber, not a bit changed, his tights, his stick, his shirt collar, his eyeglass, all the same as ever, came into the room with a genteel and youthful air. Okay, now, if this is your first time dealing with Mr. Micawber, he has a very special way of talking. It's very difficult to understand what he's saying. He uses unnecessarily complicated words. He thinks it makes him seem elegant or smart, but it really doesn't. It makes him seem kind of stupid or self-conscious or something like that. So now Mr. Micawber is going to speak. Don't worry if you don't understand him. It's difficult even for a native speaker to understand him. Amira Buzahir says it's in Pakistan it's 6:45. Where are you, Amira, that it's 2:42? In the afternoon or in the evening? I beg your pardon, Mr. Traddles, said Mr. Micawber, with the old roll in his voice, as he checked himself in a humming soft tune. I was not aware that there was any individual alien to this tenement in your sanctum. So that's Mr. Micawber talk for, I didn't know that you had a guest here. That's, actually, Hadi says, it was a typo, fearmonger. Yes. Well, think about a fishmonger sells fish, and I guess an ironmonger sells iron. So what do you think a fearmonger sells? Irma says, Amira's in Algeria. Wow. Well, I'm in Mexico, so we're all the way on the other side of the world. And Irma says it's 4:45. Where are you, Irma, that it's 4:45? Let's see. So this is Mr. Micawber talk. He says, I didn't know someone was here with you. But he doesn't say that. He says, let's read that again. I was not aware that there was any individual alien to this tenement in your sanctum. Finland. Wow. Okay, and Mr. Micawber slightly bowed to me and pulled up his shirt collar. How do you do, Mr. Micawber, said I. Sir, said Mr. Micawber. "You are exceedingly obliging. I am in statu quo." Status quo means the same. That actually is a common word. Status quo means nothing changes. So if he says, "I am in statu quo," that means I am in my normal state, nothing special. You wouldn't talk... If somebody says, "How are you?" just say fine. Don't say, "I am in statu quo." That's weird. But that phrase, that Latin phrase, status quo, that is very common. "And Mrs. Micawber?" I pursued. "Sir," said Mr. Micawber, "she is also, thank God, in statu quo." "And the children, Mr. Micawber?" "Sir," said Mr. Micawber, "I rejoice to reply that they are likewise in the enjoyment of salubrity." Salubrity. I don't know what that means. Let's look up. You didn't never use that word, salubrity, but I just want to see what it means. Favorable or promoting health or well. Well, that word salud, in Spanish at least, it means health. So that makes sense. This must be a Latin word. When you see... What kind of words do we use in English with salud, meaning health? I can't think of any. I'm sure there must be some. Oh well. But salubrity, don't worry about that word. You shouldn't use it in regular conversation, but it has to do with being healthy and happy. So when he says in the enjoyment of salubrity, a normal person would say they're healthy. All this time, Mr. Micawber had not known me in the least. So Mr. Micawber doesn't recognize him. He doesn't know that it's Davy. Though he had stood face to face with me. But now, seeing me smile, he examined my features, and more attention fell back, and cried, "Is it possible? Have I the pleasure again of beholding Copperfield?" And he shook both of my hands with the utmost fervor. That means with a lot of enthusiasm. "Good heaven, Mr. Traddles," said Mr. Micawber, "to think that I should find you acquainted with the friend of my youth, the companion of my earlier days, my dear," calling over the banisters to Mrs. Micawber, while Traddles looked with reason not a little amazed at this description of me. "Here is a gentleman in Mr. Traddles' apartment whom he wishes to have the pleasure of presenting to you, my love." So that's Mr. Micawber talk for Mr. Traddles wants you to meet this guy. Mr. Micawber immediately reappeared and shook hands with me again. And how is our good friend the Doctor, Copperfield?" said Mr. Micawber, "and all the circle at Canterbury?" "I have none but good accounts of them," said I. "I'm most delighted to hear it," said Mr. Micawber. "It was at Canterbury where we last met within the shadow, I may figuratively say, of that religious edifice immortalized by Chaucer, which was anciently the resort of pilgrims, and from the remotest corners of, in short," said Mr. Micawber, "in the immediate neighborhood of the cathedral." So all that means, this is very annoying, the way Mr. Micawber talks. He's just saying, the last time that we saw each other was in Canterbury, near the cathedral. That's all it means. I replied that it was Mr. Micawber, that it was. Mr. Micawber continued, figurative... Irma is asking about the word figurative, and figurative means it's the opposite of literal or real. It's kind of like imaginary. How did he use it? "Canterbury, where we last met within the shadow, I may figuratively say, of that religious edifice." it's kind of hard to say how he's using it here, but the Micawbers, if you know the Micawbers, they're always in trouble. They're always in financial trouble. If you remember, when Davy first knocked on the door, the milkman was there trying to get money. We didn't know that it was Mr. Micawber, but now it's funny that the milkman's like, "Give me my money! I want my money!" And now we understand it's Mr. Micawber. He always owes people money. And he and his wife had to run away from Canterbury because they owed money. So when he says we met in the shadows of the cathedral, the last time we saw each other was in the shadows of the cathedral, that means two things, because it means literally, they were in the shadows of the cathedral the last time they saw each other, but also figuratively, they were hiding in the shadows, running away because they owed money. And that's a very complicated thing to express. Hadi says salubrious weather. Yes, Hadi, you could say that if you want, but then you'll sound like Mr. Micawber. I wouldn't recommend using the word salubrious. I replied that it was, and Mr. Micawber continued talking as volubly as he could. What does that word mean? I don't know what that word means, volubly. Let's see. Volubly. In a way that involves a lot of words, spoken confidently and forcefully. See, that's how Mr. Micawber talks. He uses too many words, too many big, unnecessary words, and it's confusing to try to understand him. And that's what Davy is noting here, that Mr. Micawber continued talking as volubly as he could. So he used as many words, as many confusing words as he could. But not, I thought, without showing by some marks of concern in his countenance. Your countenance is your facial expression. So Davy is reading Mr. Micawber's countenance, his facial expression. Mr. Micawber is talking, using all these words, but Davy's concentrating on what his face is saying. That he was sensible of sounds in the room, as of Mrs. Micawber washing her hands, and hurriedly opening and shutting drawers that were uneasy in their action. "You find us, Copperfield," said Mr. Micawber, with one eye on Traddles, "at present established on what may be designated as a small and unassuming scale, but you are aware that I have, in the course of my career, surmounted difficulties and conquered obstacles. You are no stranger to that fact. And there have been periods of my life when it has been requisite that I should pause until certain expected events should turn up." Okay, it's hard. So Mr. Micawber, don't worry about all the weird words that he's using. But he's saying, you know that I've been through some difficult times. And one thing that Mr. Micawber and Mrs. Micawber always say is something will turn up. So they're always crying, "Oh, we owe so much money." And this phrasal verb, to turn up, means something will appear. Something will magically appear. So that's how they make themselves feel better when they have these bad situations. "Oh, we owe so much money. What are we going to do? We're going to be in so much trouble." Oh, something will turn up. We'll get money from somewhere. Money will magically appear. So that's what he's saying here. "When it has been requisite that I should pause until certain expected events should turn up." So, and when it has been necessary that I should fall back, rather than making what I trust I shall not be accused of presumption in terming a spring. The present is one of those momentous stages in the life of man. You find me fallen back for a spring, and I have every reason to believe that a vigorous leap will shortly be the result. Okay, I don't fully, I'm just going to guess what he's saying. I don't understand what he's saying. But I think he's saying, sometimes we have to run away and disappear. And that's what we have to do now. So they're in trouble again. It sounds like they're in trouble again. I'm not sure. We'll probably find out in a few paragraphs what's happening. Irma is asking about the word presumption. Do you know the word assume? I always get these two words mixed up. I think they mean the same thing, but let me just check. Presume and assume. Let's see. Presume and assume are similar in meaning and are often used interchangeably in everyday language. Both refer to taking something for granted or accepting something is true without necessarily having proof. So you just think something is true without having proof. Maybe you conclude, like you make conclusions. How did they use it here? When it has been necessary that I should fall back before making what I trust shall not be accused of presumption in terming. Well, unless they use presume in another way, if you're talking about here where it says presumption, especially back then, we're talking like 170 years ago, society was very structured. So you had your place in society, and you were not allowed to, well, you could move down if you wanted, but nobody wanted to do that. But you could definitely never move up. And if you tried to move up, if you were down at the bottom of the structure of society and you tried to move up, people would call you presumptuous, meaning you're imagining that you're better than you are. And so to accuse someone of presumption would be like accusing somebody of trying to be something that they're not, or trying to lie to other people. To presume something means to imagine something is true or think something is true, even if it isn't, even if you don't have evidence for it. It's like making a conclusion based on what you see or what you believe and accepting that as truth. I don't know if that makes sense. It's a pretty complicated word. But to be accused of presumption means to be accused of thinking that you're better than you are, or thinking that you know more than you do, something like that. And so don't try to understand what Mr. Micawber is saying, because it's very confusing to try to understand every word that he's saying. It's really, I don't understand it. I don't understand this paragraph. I think he's saying that we're in trouble and we have to run away again. But let's see. Let's keep reading and see what's happening. I really don't understand this paragraph very well. I was expressing my satisfaction. It can't be that, because Davy wouldn't be expressing his satisfaction if Mr. Micawber is saying we have to run away again. Maybe he was saying the opposite. We have a good situation here. Let's see. When Mrs. Micawber came in, a little more slatternly than she used to be. Okay, let's look at that word slattern. Slatternly. These are not common words. You don't have to worry about learning them. I don't know what they mean. Describing someone or someone being untidy, slovenly, or careless. So she looks a little bit dirty. She looks like she's not taking care of herself. So Mrs. Micawber came in a little more slatternly than she used to be, or so she seemed now to my unaccustomed eyes, but still with some preparation of herself for company, and with a pair of brown gloves on. "My dear," said Mr. Micawber, leading her towards me, "here is a gentleman of the name of Copperfield, who wishes to renew his acquaintance with you." It would have been better, as it turned out, to have led gently up to this announcement, for Mrs. Micawber, being in a delicate state of health, was overcome by it. That means when something overcomes you, it wins over you. So she was overcome by the news. The news dominated her, which was a bad thing. She was overcome by this news, and it was taken so unwell that Mr. Micawber was obliged, in great trepidation, to run down to the water butt in the backyard and draw a basinful to lave her brow. So when he said, here's David Copperfield, and she was like, oh, and she fainted or something like that happened to her. The news was too much for her in her state, in her condition. She presently revived, however, and was really pleased to see me. We had a half-hour talk altogether, and I asked her about the twins, who she said were grown great creatures, and after Master and Miss Micawber, whom she described as absolute giants, they were not produced on that occasion. Mr. Micawber was very anxious that I should stay to dinner. I should not have been averse to do so, but that I imagined I detected trouble and calculation relative to the extent of the cold meat in Mrs. Micawber's eyes. I therefore pleaded another engagement and observed, so Mr. Micawber is inviting them, wants Davy to stay for dinner, and Davy really wants to, but he could see in Mrs. Micawber's eyes that they don't have enough food. So he lied and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I have to go see someone else." I therefore pleaded another engagement, and observing that Mrs. Micawber's spirits were immediately lightened, I resisted all persuasion to forego it. So Davy said, no, I have another engagement, sorry. And Mr. Micawber was saying, oh, you have to. But he could see that Mrs. Micawber was very happy that he said no, because they don't have enough food. But I told Traddles and Mr. and Mrs. Micawber that before I could think of leaving, they must appoint a day when they would come to dine with me. The occupations to which Traddles stood pledged rendered it necessary to fix a somewhat distant one, but an appointment was made for the purpose, and suited us all. And then I took my leave. Mr. Micawber, under the pretense of showing me nearer way than that by which I had come, accompanied me to the corner of the street. Being anxious, he explained to me to say a few words to an old friend in confidence. "My dear Copperfield," said Mr. Micawber, "I need hardly tell you that to have beneath our roof, under existing circumstances, a mind like that which gleams, if I may be allowed the expression, which gleams in your friend Traddles, is unspeakable comfort." So this is Mr. Micawber language for, we're so happy to have Traddles staying with us. He's such a smart person. With a washerwoman who exposes hard bake for sale in her parlor window, dwelling next door, and a Bow Street officer residing over the way. You may imagine that his society is a source of consolation to myself and Mrs. Micawber. I am at present, my dear Copperfield, engaged in the sale of corn upon commission. It is not an avocation of remunerative description. So Mr. Micawber is saying, I'm selling corn, but I don't make any money. In other words, it does not pay. So there he says it very clearly. It does not pay. And some temporary embarrassments of a pecuniary nature. Wellington says, "Hi, how are you doing?" You are I'm a warrior. Congratulations for these classes. Thank you. Thank you for watching, Wellington. I am, however, delighted to add that I have now an immediate prospect of something turning up. Remember, that phrasal verb, something turning up, means something magically appearing. I am not at liberty to say in what direction. So it seems like there's an opportunity for Mr. Micawber to make some money, but right now he's not allowed to talk about it. He's not allowed to give details to anyone, which I trust will enable me to provide permanently, both for myself and for your friend Traddles, in whom I have an unaffected interest. You may perhaps be prepared to hear that Mrs. Micawber is in a state of health which renders it not wholly improbable that an addition may be ultimately made to those pledges of affection which, in short, to that infantine group. So that's Mr. Micawber speak for we're about to have another baby. We have another baby coming. Irma asks about pecuniary. Okay, again, this is not a common word. Sometimes I think it's used now, but I have to look it up. I think it has to do with making money, but let's see. Mr. Micawber's words are not words to pay attention to. Pecuniary is an adjective that relates to money or financial matters. That's what I thought. So a normal person would say, I'm going to be making some money soon. But Mr. Micawber, who speaks in a very strange way, says, I have some business of a pecuniary nature. There's no person on earth who talks like that. Mrs. Micawber, just look at this. Look at this phrase that is informing Davy that they're about to have another baby. Do you understand that? I mean, when you read that, can you tell that Mr. Micawber is saying, we're having another baby? I'll read it again. Just listen. Be prepared to hear that Mrs. Micawber is in a state of health which renders it not wholly improbable that an addition may be ultimately made to those pledges of affection which, in short, to the infantine group, Mrs. Micawber's... to the infantine group. Maybe that word infant, meaning baby, could give you a hint that it means they're having a baby. But it's really hard to understand what he's talking about sometimes. Mrs. Micawber's family have been so good as to express their dissatisfaction at this state of things. So Mrs. Micawber's family is not happy that they're having another baby because they're always asking their relatives for money. They never have any money. I have merely to observe that I am not aware that it is any business of theirs, and that I repel that exhibition of feeling with scorn and with defiance. Mr. Micawber then shook hands with me again and left me. Well, that was kind of a short chapter. I was beginning to think these usually last about 2 hours, but I wouldn't dare try to start reading chapter 28 because I think probably this would be 2 or 3 hours. That's too long for me in one video. So that was the end of chapter 27, and thank you for coming and watching and asking questions and making comments. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. And I will try to come back tomorrow night at the same time to do chapter 28, which is Mr. Micawber's Gauntlet. All right, but until then, have a great night or great morning or great day, and hopefully I will see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.